I was watching the HOA president stand in my driveway through my phone screen, her hand raised like she was about to knock, when I realized she had no idea the camera above my garage was recording every move she made. That was 3 seconds before she decided to walk around to my backyard gate without permission. My name is Grant Coleman, and I had lived in the Riverside Meadows subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona, for exactly 8 months when Patricia Hendricks became the bane of my existence. The whole mess started on a Tuesday morning in early March when I was sitting in my home office, trying to finish a report for my engineering firm, and my phone buzzed with a notification from my security camera system. I glanced at the screen and saw Patricia standing at my front door, clipboard in hand, wearing what I had come to recognize as her uniform. A cream-colored blazer, pressed khaki pants, and an expression that suggested she had just discovered someone had committed a felony against suburban aesthetics. I saved my document and walked to the front door, already feeling my shoulders tense. Every interaction with Patricia followed the same script. She would smile that tight smile that never reached her eyes, tell me about some violation I had supposedly committed, and hand me a notice that threatened fines if I did not comply within an unreasonable time frame. Last month it was my trash cans being visible from the street for 45 minutes past the designated time. The month before that, she claimed my lawn was half an inch too tall, even though I had measured it myself after mowing. I opened the door before she could knock. "Good morning, Patricia." She looked momentarily thrown off by my preemptive greeting, but recovered quickly. "Good morning, Grant. I am here on official HOA business." She always said it like that, as if she were a federal agent serving a warrant instead of a retired real estate agent with too much time on her hands. "What is it this time?" She gestured toward my garage with her pen. "Your security camera, the one mounted above your garage door. It is in violation of our community guidelines regarding exterior modifications and surveillance equipment." I followed her gesture to the camera I had installed 6 weeks ago. It was a standard outdoor security camera, black, about the size of a tennis ball, positioned to cover my driveway and front entrance. Nothing fancy, nothing obtrusive. "That camera is legal, Patricia." I checked both state law and the HOA covenants before I installed it. Section 12. Paragraph 4 of our covenants clearly states that all exterior modifications must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. She pulled a folded paper from her clipboard and held it out to me. "This is your formal notice. You have 14 days to remove the camera or submit a retroactive approval request, which will likely be denied. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100 per day." I took the notice but did not look at it. "Patricia, security cameras are explicitly protected under Arizona state law. HOAs cannot prohibit them. They can regulate placement and appearance to some extent, but they cannot ban them outright or require their removal. The Architectural Review Committee will make that determination." Her voice had that clipped quality that meant she was not interested in debating. 14 days, Grant. Have a good day." She turned and walked back down my driveway to her white Lexus SUV, which she had parked directly in front of my mailbox. I watched her drive away, then looked down at the notice in my hand. It was printed on official Riverside Meadows HOA letterhead, complete with their logo of a river and some generic trees. The language was formal and threatening, full of phrases like immediate compliance and escalating penalties. I went back inside and pulled up Arizona revised statutes on my computer. Sure enough, Title 33, Chapter 16, Section 33-1808 made it clear that HOAs could not prohibit security devices or security cameras. They could adopt reasonable rules about placement, but those rules had to be applied uniformly and could not effectively prevent homeowners from installing security measures. My camera was mounted on my own structure, pointed at my own property, and installed in a standard, unobtrusive manner. There was no reasonable argument for its removal. I drafted a response letter, citing the specific statute, and explained that while I was happy to discuss the camera's placement with the Architectural Review Committee, I would not be removing it. I also pointed out that the camera served a legitimate security purpose, as there had been several car break-ins in the neighborhood over the past few months. I printed the letter, signed it, and scanned it into my computer before sending it via email to the HOA management company and Patricia directly. Her response came within an hour. It was curt and dismissive. She claimed the statute did not apply in the way I suggested, and that the Architectural Review Committee would meet the following week to discuss my violation. She also noted that my failure to comply would be documented and could affect my standing in the community. I called my friend Derek, who was a real estate attorney in Phoenix. He laughed when I explained the situation. "Grant, they have zero grounds. That statute is ironclad. If they try to fine you, document everything and let me know. You will have a solid case and they will end up paying your legal fees." I figured as much, but I wanted to make sure I was not missing something. "You are not. Just keep records of all communication. And honestly, if your camera catches anything interesting, that will just strengthen your position." I thanked him and hung up, feeling vindicated but also irritated. I had moved to Riverside Meadows because it seemed like a quiet, well-maintained community. The houses were new, the streets were clean, and the amenities included a decent pool and a small fitness center. What I had not anticipated was that the HOA would be run like a fiefdom by someone who seemed to derive genuine pleasure from harassing residents over minor issues. The Architectural Review Committee meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at 7. I cleared my calendar and showed up at the community center with a folder full of printed statutes, photos of my camera installation, and examples of similar installations in other homes within the subdivision. I was prepared for a fight. The community center was a single-story building near the entrance of the neighborhood, decorated in the same bland southwestern style as everything else in Gilbert. Inside, a conference room had been set up with a long table at the front and rows of chairs for residents. Patricia sat at the center of the table, flanked by two other committee members, a man in his 60s named Richard Stoltz and a woman in her 50s named Barbara Yates. About a dozen other residents were scattered in the chairs, most of them looking bored or annoyed. Patricia called the meeting to order and went through several items on the agenda, approving paint colors and roof replacements with minimal discussion. When she got to my case, her tone shifted. Item 7. Grant Coleman, 482 Sycamore Drive, unauthorized installation of exterior surveillance equipment. She said it like I had installed a neon sign or a satellite dish. "Mr. Coleman, you are welcome to address the committee." I stood and walked to the front, keeping my folder closed for the moment. "Thank you. As I explained in my written response, my security camera is fully compliant with Arizona state law. Title 33, Chapter 16, Section 33, 1808 specifically prohibits HOAs from banning security devices. The camera is mounted on my garage, which is my property, and it is pointed at my driveway and front entrance, which are also my property. It does not infringe on anyone else's privacy, and it serves a legitimate security purpose." Richard leaned forward, squinting at me over his glasses. "Did you submit an architectural review request before installing the camera? No, because the statute makes it clear that HOAs cannot require prior approval for security devices. Requiring approval would effectively give the HOA the power to ban them, which is exactly what the law prohibits. Barbara frowned. But our covenants require approval for all exterior modifications. That is true for modifications that fall under the HOA's regulatory authority. Security cameras do not. The statute overrides any conflicting covenant language. Patricia tapped her pen on the table. Mr. Coleman, this committee is not here to debate state law. Our role is to enforce the covenants that all residents agreed to when they purchased their homes. If you believe our decision is incorrect, you are free to pursue legal remedies. But for now, we are requiring you to remove the camera within the 14-day period specified in your notice. I opened my folder and pulled out a copy of the statute, along with a legal memo Derek had helped me draft. I placed them on the table in front of the committee. This is the relevant statute, along with an analysis of how it applies to this situation. I am not going to remove the camera. If you attempt to fine me, I will take legal action, and based on the clear language of the law, I will win. More importantly, the HOA will be liable for my attorney's fees. The room was silent. A few of the other residents exchanged glances. Patricia's face tightened and I could see the muscles in her jaw working. We will take your materials under advisement and issue a written decision within 7 days. That is fine, but I want to be clear. The camera stays. I gathered my folder and returned to my seat. The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, but I barely paid attention. I could feel Patricia's eyes on me, and I knew this was not going to end quietly. The written decision arrived 5 days later, and it was exactly what I expected. The committee denied my appeal and reiterated the demand that I remove the camera. They also imposed the $100 per day fine, starting from the original 14-day deadline which had already passed. According to their math, I now owed $1,400. I forwarded the decision to Derek, who sent a formal demand letter to the HOA on my behalf. The letter explained that the fines were unlawful, that any attempt to collect them would be met with litigation, and that the HOA should cease all enforcement actions related to the camera immediately. He also requested reimbursement for his fees in drafting the letter. Patricia's response was to double down. She sent another notice, this time threatening to place a lien on my property if I did not pay the fines within 30 days. She also sent a separate letter claiming that I was creating a hostile environment within the community, and that my refusal to comply with committee decisions was damaging neighborhood cohesion. That was when things got interesting. It was a Wednesday afternoon, about a week after I received the lien threat, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my security camera. I was in a meeting at work, so I could not check it immediately, but when I looked at the footage during my lunch break, I was stunned. The video showed Patricia walking up my driveway at around 1 in the afternoon. She looked around, clearly checking to see if anyone was watching, then walked directly to the side gate that led to my backyard. She tried the latch, found it unlocked, and opened the gate. She stepped into my backyard, disappeared from the camera's view for about 3 minutes, then came back out, closed the gate, and walked back to her car. I replayed the video twice, my pulse quickening. She had just trespassed on my property. Not only that, but she had done it while we were in the middle of a legal dispute about the very camera that had caught her. I immediately saved the footage to 3 different locations: my phone, my computer, and a cloud backup. Then I called Derek. "You are not going to believe this," I said, and I sent him the video. He watched it and started laughing. "Grant, this is gold. She just handed you the case on a silver platter." "What do I do?" First, file a police report. Trespassing is a crime. Second, send her a formal notice that she was recorded without permission entering your property and that any further trespassing will result in criminal charges. Third, keep that camera exactly where it is and make sure it is running at all times. I followed his advice. I went to the Gilbert Police Department that evening and filed a report. The officer who took my statement watched the video and confirmed that it clearly showed trespassing. He said they would follow up with Patricia and that I should document any further incidents. I also sent Patricia a formal letter, via certified mail, informing her that she had been recorded trespassing on my property and that I would pursue criminal charges if it happened again. I included a still image from the video, showing her opening my gate, just so there was no ambiguity. Her response was immediate and furious. She called me at 8 in the morning the next day, her voice shaking with anger. "How dare you file a police report against me? I was conducting an HOA inspection, which is well within my authority." "Patricia, you do not have the authority to enter my backyard without my permission. That is trespassing, plain and simple. The covenants give the HOA the right to inspect properties for compliance. The covenants allow for inspections of exterior areas that are visible from the street or common areas. They do not give you the right to open my gate and walk into my backyard. If you had questions about my property, you should have knocked on my door or sent a letter. This is harassment, Grant. You installed an illegal camera, refused to comply with a lawful order, and now you are weaponizing that camera against me. The camera is legal. Your order was not lawful and you trespassed on my property. If you do it again, I will press charges." She hung up without another word. Over the next few days, I heard from several neighbors who told me that Patricia had been going door to door, complaining about me and trying to rally support for some kind of action against me. A few of them thought the whole thing was ridiculous and told me they supported my right to have a security camera. Others seemed uncomfortable with the conflict and tried to stay neutral. One neighbor, a guy named Tom Ramirez who lived 2 houses down, stopped by one evening with a 6-pack of beer. "I just wanted to say I think you are doing the right thing," he said as we sat on my front porch. "Patricia has been a nightmare since she became HOA president. Last year, she tried to fine me because my garage door was open for more than 2 hours on a Saturday while I was cleaning it out. I had to fight it for 3 months. Why do people keep electing her? Most people do not vote in HOA elections. She runs unopposed and the only people who show up to meetings are her friends. It is a rigged system." We talked for a while about the absurdities of HOA governance, and by the time Tom left, I felt a bit better. At least I was not alone in thinking Patricia was out of control. The police followed up with Patricia a few days later. An officer went to her house and informed her that trespassing on my property again would result in charges. According to the officer I spoke with afterward, Patricia had insisted she had done nothing wrong, and that the HOA covenants gave her access to all properties. The officer had explained in no uncertain terms that covenants do not override criminal law and that she needed to stay off my property unless I gave her explicit permission. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got another motion alert from my camera. This time it was a Saturday morning around 9. I was at the gym, so I checked the footage on my phone while sitting in my car in the parking lot. The video showed Patricia, along with Richard from the Architectural Review Committee, walking up my driveway. They stopped in front of my garage and spent several minutes looking at the camera, pointing at it, and apparently discussing it. Then, to my astonishment, Richard pulled out his phone and took several photos of my house, my driveway, and my front yard. After that, they walked around to the side gate again. This time, Patricia pointed at the gate and said something to Richard, but they did not open it. Instead, they walked back to the front and stood there for another minute before leaving. I saved the footage and immediately called Derek. "She is back and she brought a friend this time. Did they enter your property?" "No, but they were clearly casing it, and they spent a lot of time looking at the camera. Send me the footage. This is starting to look like a pattern of harassment." I sent him the video, and he called me back an hour later. "Grant, I think it is time to go on the offensive. Let me draft a formal complaint to the HOA management company and the board. We are going to document every violation, every unlawful fine, and every instance of harassment. If they do not back off, we are going to file suit. Do it." Derek's complaint was 10 pages long and methodically laid out the case. It cited the statute protecting security cameras, documented the unlawful fines, included still images from both trespassing incidents, and demanded that the HOA rescind all penalties, issue a formal apology, and reimburse my legal fees. He sent it to the HOA management company, the board, and Patricia personally. The management company responded first. They were a third-party firm called Desert Vista Property Management, and they handled the day-to-day operations for several HOAs in the area. Their representative, a woman named Linda Carlson, called me 2 days after receiving the complaint. "Mr. Coleman, I want to apologize for the situation you have been dealing with," she said. Her voice was professional and genuinely apologetic. "We have reviewed your complaint and the supporting documentation, and it is clear that the board has overstepped its authority. We are going to recommend that all fines be rescinded and that no further action be taken regarding your security camera. What about the trespassing?" "That is a matter between you and Mrs. Hendricks. From a management perspective, we will be advising the board that they do not have the authority to enter private property without permission, except in genuine emergencies. And the lien threat, that will be withdrawn immediately." Again, I apologize. This should never have escalated to this point. I thanked her and hung up, feeling cautiously optimistic, but I knew Patricia was not going to take this lying down. Sure enough, I received an email from her that evening. It was long, rambling, and filled with accusations. She claimed I was undermining the HOA, creating division in the community, and setting a dangerous precedent that would lead to chaos. She also accused me of installing the camera specifically to spy on her, which was absurd. I had installed it weeks before our first conflict, and it was pointed at my own driveway, not her house. I did not respond. Derek had advised me to avoid any direct communication with Patricia unless it was absolutely necessary. Every interaction was just more fodder for potential litigation. The board held an emergency meeting the following week. I was not invited, but Tom Ramirez went and filled me in afterward. According to him, the meeting was a disaster. Linda from the management company had attended and explained that the HOA's actions regarding my camera were legally indefensible. She recommended that the board vote to rescind the fines and drop the matter entirely. Patricia had apparently gone ballistic. She accused Linda of being in my pocket, claimed that I had threatened her, and insisted that the board had a duty to enforce the covenants regardless of state law. Richard had tried to support her, but Barbara and the 2 other board members had sided with Linda. The vote was 3-2 in favor of rescinding the fines and closing the case. Patricia had stormed out of the meeting, and according to Tom, she had been telling anyone who would listen that she was going to find another way to deal with me. I should have taken that as a warning. 3 days later, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. It was from the town of Gilbert Code Enforcement. informing me that a complaint had been filed regarding an unpermitted structure on my property. The notice stated that an inspector would be coming by within the next week to investigate. I knew immediately who had filed the complaint. Patricia had gone around the HOA and tried to use the town's code enforcement to accomplish what she could not do through the board. I called the number on the notice and spoke to an inspector named Jeff Morales. He was polite and explained that someone had claimed I had installed a structure without the required permits. I told him the only thing I had installed recently was a security camera, which did not require a permit. He said he would still need to come by and verify, but it sounded like a nuisance complaint. Jeff came by 2 days later, looked at the camera for about 30 seconds, and confirmed that it did not require a permit. He filled out a form on his tablet, marked the complaint as unfounded, and apologized for the inconvenience. "Happens a lot," he said. "Neighbor disputes, HOA stuff. People think they can use code enforcement as a weapon. Does not usually work out the way they hope." "Any way to find out who filed the complaint?" "It was anonymous, but based on what you are telling me, I can guess." He gave me a knowing look. "Just keep documenting everything. If it keeps happening, you might have grounds for a harassment claim." After Jeff left, I sat on my couch and tried to process the situation. Patricia had trespassed on my property, tried to find me illegally, threatened to place a lien on my house, and now filed a bogus code enforcement complaint. This had gone from annoying to genuinely concerning. I called Derek again. "She is escalating." "Yeah, I see that. Let me reach out to her attorney if she has one. If not, I will send her another letter making it clear that any further harassment will result in a lawsuit. We need to draw a line." Derek sent the letter the next day. It was blunt and unambiguous. It stated that Patricia's actions constituted harassment, that the bogus code enforcement complaint was an abuse of process, and that any further actions targeting me would result in immediate legal action seeking damages and an injunction. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I started to think that maybe Patricia had finally gotten the message. My camera kept recording, but there were no more surprise visits, no more letters, and no more complaints. Then, on a Thursday evening in late April, my camera caught something that changed everything. It was around 7 in the evening, just after sunset. I was making dinner when my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I glanced at the screen and saw Patricia standing in my driveway again. But this time, she was not alone. She was with Richard, and they were both carrying something. I opened the live feed and watched in real time. Patricia was holding a small stepladder, and Richard was holding what looked like a toolbox. They set the ladder down directly under my camera, and Richard climbed up. He pulled a screwdriver from the toolbox and started trying to remove the camera from its mount. I could not believe what I was seeing. They were attempting to vandalize my property, and they were doing it in full view of the camera they were trying to destroy. I grabbed my keys and ran out the front door. They heard the door open and both turned toward me, their faces frozen in shock. Richard was still on the ladder, screwdriver in hand, and Patricia was standing at the base, holding the ladder steady. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Richard climbed down quickly and Patricia took a step back. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Patricia found her voice. "This camera is illegal and the board has authorized its removal." "That is a lie, Patricia. The board voted to drop the matter. You are trespassing and you are attempting to destroy my property. Get off my driveway right now or I am calling the police." "We have every right to enforce the covenants," Richard said, but his voice wavered. "No, you do not. You have no right to be on my property and you definitely have no right to touch my camera. Leave. Now." Patricia's face flushed red, but she picked up the ladder and started walking toward the street. Richard grabbed the toolbox and followed. They loaded everything into Patricia's SUV and drove away without another word. I went back inside, my hands shaking with adrenaline, and immediately downloaded the footage. Then I called Derek. "They just tried to remove the camera," I said, my voice tight. "I have it all on video." "Are you serious?" "Completely. They brought a ladder and tools. I caught them in the act." "Grant, that is vandalism, attempted destruction of property, and trespassing. You need to call the police right now and file a report. Do not wait." I called the Gilbert Police Department and explained the situation. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I showed them the footage, which clearly showed Patricia and Richard setting up the ladder, Richard attempting to remove the camera, and me confronting them. The officers watched it twice, took notes, and asked for Patricia's contact information. "This is pretty clear-cut," one of the officers said. "We will follow up with both of them tonight. You will get a case number, and you can request copies of any reports for your records. What happens next? We will interview them, and based on what we see here, we will likely refer charges to the town prosecutor. Could be trespassing, criminal damage, depends on how the prosecutor wants to handle it." The officers left, and I sat down on my couch, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. Patricia had gone so far over the line that there was no coming back. Whatever happened next, I knew this was going to get ugly. The police interviewed Patricia and Richard that evening. I did not hear the details until later, but according to the report I eventually received, Patricia had initially denied being on my property. When the officers showed her the footage, she changed her story and claimed she had been conducting an HOA inspection. Richard said he was just helping Patricia and that he had not realized what they were doing was wrong. The officers did not arrest anyone that night, but they issued formal warnings and told both Patricia and Richard that charges would likely be filed. They also advised Patricia that any further contact with me or my property would result in immediate arrest. Derek filed a motion for a restraining order the next morning. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out, and in the meantime, Patricia was ordered to stay at least 100 feet away from my property. Word spread through the neighborhood fast. Tom stopped by the next day and told me that several residents were talking about calling for Patricia's resignation. Apparently, this was not the first time she had gone too far, but it was the first time there was video evidence and police involvement. The HOA board held another emergency meeting, this time without Patricia. Barbara Yates, who was the vice president, sent me an email inviting me to attend. I decided to go, mostly because I wanted to see how the board was going to handle the situation. The meeting was tense. Barbara opened by acknowledging that there had been serious issues with the board's handling of my security camera, and that Patricia's actions had put the HOA in legal jeopardy. She apologized on behalf of the board and said they were working with the management company to ensure nothing like this happened again. Richard was also at the meeting, and he looked miserable. He stood up and gave a rambling apology, saying he had used poor judgment and that he never intended to break the law. He announced that he was resigning from the Architectural Review Committee, effective immediately. Several other residents spoke up, expressing frustration with how the HOA had been run and calling for reforms. One woman suggested that the board adopt a formal policy requiring legal review before taking enforcement actions. Another suggested term limits for board members to prevent any one person from accumulating too much power. By the end of the meeting, Barbara had agreed to bring several proposals to the next regular board meeting, including a revision of the enforcement policies and a review of Patricia's conduct. She also confirmed that Patricia would not be participating in any board activities pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. I left the meeting feeling like maybe, finally, things were going to change. The restraining order hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in early May. Derek represented me, and Patricia showed up with an attorney, a sharp-looking guy in his 50s named Paul Brennan. The judge was a no-nonsense woman named Judge Susan Martinez, and she clearly was not interested in wasting time. Derek presented the evidence. The video of Patricia trespassing the first time, the video of her and Richard attempting to remove the camera, and the documentation of all the harassment, threats, and unlawful fines. He also submitted the police reports and the statement from Jeff Morales, the code enforcement inspector, about the bogus complaint. Paul Brennan tried to argue that Patricia had been acting in her capacity as HOA president, and that her actions, while perhaps misguided, were not malicious. Judge Martinez cut him off. "Counselor, I have watched the video. Your client entered Mr. Coleman's property without permission not once, but twice. The second time, she brought tools with the apparent intent to remove his security camera. That is not HOA enforcement. That is trespassing and attempted vandalism. Does your client dispute that she was on his property?" "No, Your Honor, but she believed she had the authority." Belief is not a defense to trespassing. The restraining order is granted. Mrs. Hendricks is to have no contact with Mr. Coleman, directly or indirectly, and she is to stay at least 100 feet from his property at all times. This order is effective for 1 year, at which point Mr. Coleman may petition for an extension if necessary. Patricia's face went pale and she looked like she was about to argue, but Paul put a hand on her arm and shook his head. The hearing was over in less than 20 minutes. Outside the courthouse, Derek clapped me on the shoulder. That went about as well as it could have. Now we wait and see if the prosecutor files charges. The charges came 3 weeks later. The town prosecutor filed 2 counts of criminal trespassing against Patricia and 1 count against Richard. Both were misdemeanors, but they carried potential fines and even jail time. Patricia also faced an additional charge of attempted criminal damage related to the camera incident. The case moved slowly through the system, as these things do. There were several pre-trial hearings, motions, and continuances. Derek stayed in touch with the prosecutor's office and kept me updated. In the meantime, the HOA board held a special election to replace Patricia as president. Barbara Yates ran unopposed and won easily. One of her first acts was to formally rescind all fines and penalties against me, issue a written apology, and reimburse me for my legal fees up to that point. She also implemented several of the reforms that had been discussed at the emergency meeting, including a requirement that the board consult with an attorney before taking any enforcement action that could result in fines or liens. Tom Ramirez joined the Architectural Review Committee, and together with a few other level-headed residents, they started reviewing and revising the community guidelines to make them more reasonable. The changes included clarifying that security cameras were allowed and that HOA inspections could only be conducted from public streets and common areas. By the time summer rolled around, Riverside Meadows felt like a different place. The pool was open, kids were playing in the streets, and there was a general sense that the neighborhood had turned a corner. Patricia's criminal trial was set for late July. Derek and I attended, along with several other residents who wanted to see how it played out. Paul Brennan had negotiated a plea deal for Richard, who agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of trespassing in exchange for the other charge being dropped. He was sentenced to probation and a $500 fine. Patricia, however, refused to take a plea deal. She insisted she had done nothing wrong and that she was being persecuted for trying to enforce the rules. Paul Brennan looked like he wanted to crawl under the table every time she spoke. The trial was short. The prosecutor played the videos, called me as a witness, and called one of the responding police officers. I testified about the timeline of events, the harassment, and the 2 trespassing incidents. The officer testified about Patricia's statements and the evidence he had observed. Paul Brennan tried to argue that Patricia had a good faith belief that she was acting within her authority, but it was a weak defense. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a guilty verdict on both counts of trespassing and the attempted criminal damage charge. Judge Martinez sentenced Patricia to 6 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a fine of $1,500. She also ordered Patricia to have no contact with me for the duration of her probation and to resign from any HOA leadership positions. Patricia stood there, stiff and silent, as the sentence was read. When it was over, she walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, definitely. Vindication, for sure. But also a bit of sadness. This whole situation had been so unnecessary. If Patricia had just accepted that the camera was legal and moved on, none of this would have happened. Instead, her need to control and her refusal to admit she was wrong had led to criminal charges, public humiliation, and the end of her tenure as HOA president. Derek and I went out for lunch after the trial, and he raised his glass of iced tea. To justice and to security cameras. I laughed and clinked my glass against his. To security cameras. Over the following months, life in Riverside Meadows settled into a comfortable routine. Barbara Yates turned out to be a competent and reasonable HOA president. She focused on actual community issues like maintaining the common areas, organizing neighborhood events, and keeping the budget balanced. There were no more petty enforcement actions, no more harassment, and no more drama. I kept my security camera exactly where it was, and it continued to do its job. It recorded a couple of package deliveries, captured footage of a coyote wandering through the neighborhood one night, and once caught a teenager trying to steal a bike from a neighbor's garage. That footage helped the police recover the bike and identify the kid, who turned out to be from a different neighborhood. Tom and I became good friends, and we started a tradition of Friday evening beers on one of our porches, talking about sports, work, and the absurdities of suburban life. Other neighbors joined sometimes, and it felt like the community was actually becoming a community instead of just a collection of houses ruled by an overbearing HOA. I ran into Patricia once, about 6 months after the trial. I was at the grocery store, loading bags into my car, when I saw her pushing a cart across the parking lot. She saw me at the same time, and for a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she turned and walked in the other direction. I did not feel angry or triumphant. I just felt glad it was over. A year after the whole mess started, the HOA held its annual meeting. Barbara gave a report on the state of the community, highlighting the improvements that had been made to the bylaws and the positive feedback from residents. She also announced that the management company had implemented new training for board members to ensure they understood their legal obligations and limitations. During the open forum portion of the meeting, a newer resident stood up and asked about security cameras. Barbara smiled and explained that cameras were not only allowed but encouraged, as long as they were installed in a reasonable manner and did not infringe on neighbors' privacy. She pointed to me and said, "Grant Coleman can tell you all about it. He is the reason we have clear policies now." A few people chuckled, and I gave a small wave. It was a weird feeling, being known as the guy who fought the HOA and won. but I also knew that what I had done mattered. Other residents now felt more confident standing up for their rights, and the board was more careful about overstepping its authority. As I drove home that night, I glanced at the camera above my garage. It was still there, still recording, still doing exactly what I had installed it to do, keeping my home and my property safe. It had also done something I never expected, exposing the abuse of power and forcing a change that made the entire neighborhood better. I parked in my driveway, walked to my front door, and looked up at the camera one more time. Then I went inside, poured myself a drink, and sat on my couch, finally able to relax without wondering what nonsense Patricia was going to pull next. The whole experience had taught me a lot about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, and about the fact that sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to fight, even when it would be easier to just give in. It also taught me that HOAs, when run by reasonable people, can actually be a good thing. But when they are run by petty tyrants, they can make your life miserable. I was glad I had installed that camera. I was glad I had fought back. And I was glad that, in the end, the system worked the way it was supposed to. A few months later, I got a call from a reporter at the local newspaper. She had heard about my case from someone at the courthouse and wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and homeowners' rights. I agreed to be interviewed, and the story ran on the front page of the local section. The headline read, "Gilbert Mann's security camera exposes HOA president's illegal actions." The article detailed the timeline of events, included quotes from me and Derek, and featured a still image from the video of Patricia and Richard attempting to remove the camera. It also included commentary from a legal expert who explained Arizona's laws regarding security cameras and HOAs. The story got a lot of attention. I received emails and calls from other homeowners across the state who were dealing with similar issues. Some of them asked for advice, others just wanted to share their own horror stories. Derek ended up taking on several new clients who were fighting their HOAs over various disputes. The Arizona State Legislature even took notice. A representative from Mesa introduced a bill that would strengthen protections for homeowners installing security devices and clarify the penalties for HOAs that violated those protections. The bill passed the following year, and it became known informally as the Coleman Amendment, though that was not its official name. I never set out to become some kind of HOA reform advocate. I just wanted to keep my house safe and be left alone. But sometimes, standing up for yourself ends up making a difference for other people too. As I sit here now, more than 2 years after that first confrontation with Patricia, I can look back on the whole experience with a sense of perspective. It was stressful, frustrating, and at times infuriating. But it also reminded me that you do not have to accept injustice just because it comes from someone in a position of authority. My camera is still there, still recording. And every time I pull into my driveway and see that little black lens, I remember that sometimes the best defense is a good recording device and the willingness to use the evidence it provides. Riverside Meadows is a good place to live now. The HOA functions the way it should, the neighbors are friendly, and there is a sense of mutual respect that was missing before. Barbara Yates is still president, and she is doing a great job. Tom and I still have our Friday beers, and we have added a few more people to our regular group. Patricia moved out of the neighborhood about a year after her conviction. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house and moved to Scottsdale. I do not know what she is doing now, and honestly, I do not care. I hope she learned something from the experience, but I am not counting on it. As for me, I am still working as an engineer, still living in my house on Sycamore Drive, and still enjoying the quiet suburban life I moved here for. The only difference is that now I have a really good security camera system, a great attorney on speed dial, and a story that I will probably be telling for the rest of my life. And you know what? I am okay with that, because at the end of the day, I did the right thing. I stood up for myself, I followed the law, and I refused to be bullied. That camera saved me from thousands of dollars in illegal fines, protected my property from vandalism, and provided the evidence needed to hold someone accountable for their actions. So if you are reading this and you are dealing with an HOA that is overstepping its bounds, here is my advice. Know your rights, document everything, and do not be afraid to fight back. Get a good attorney, install security cameras if you need them, and do not let anyone intimidate you into giving up your legal protections. It might be a hassle, it might be stressful, and it might even end up in court. But in the end, it is worth it. Because your home is your castle, and no one has the right to treat you like a subject in their little kingdom, no matter what their title is or what kind of clipboard they are carrying. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I am glad I did. And every time I see that camera above my garage, I am reminded that sometimes the smallest act of resistance can lead to the biggest changes. Life in Riverside Meadows goes on. The sun rises over the desert every morning, the streets are clean, the lawns are green, and the HOA board meets once a month to discuss boring things like landscaping contracts and pool maintenance. It is exactly what suburban life should be: peaceful, predictable, and just a little bit boring. And that is exactly how I like it.